It's 2024. In the past few years, we've seen the rise of deepfake technology powered by AI, combined with a falling level of interest in the importance of preserving records and even sort of telling the truth, has combined to mean that today there's a skepticism rules when it comes to information, both in terms of libraries, physical libraries, digital collections, and the importance of knowledge, the importance of truth in general. Those who do have the skills find it extremely easy to navigate this world. They can see their way through the lies, they can see their way to what matters. But at the same time, these people are also in demand because they are the ones best able to manipulate others. They get ahead by manipulating, by forcing other people, by changing other people's perception of the world. Yes, processes are more efficient, AI has done its job, but with time we see a drop-off in innovation, we see a drop-off in diversity, as AI feeds itself, looking only to the past, to the trends that used to characterize how we used to be. We see, and similarly as we saw with platforms like Amazon and Google today, we see a reduction in quality as firms look to maximize their profits, squeezing both consumers and other businesses at the same time. Scenario 2. A few years ago, following concerns about electoral interference from deepfakes, scandals about poor predictions by AI, scandals about collusion, about cartels between major AI companies and major copyright right holders, and a failure of AI to actually deliver benefits, a citizens' convention was held. Over a series of months, including with lots of consultations in libraries, as well as librarian participation in the overall steering committee, a structure for a new approach to AI was decided upon. This focused on AI as a utility, designed to improve people's lives, to resolve the challenges that we face. There was a huge investment in digitization, in the building of large language models, often based on library collections. So now, it's not just tens of dozens of languages that have large language models, but hundreds or thousands, making sure that people all over the world can benefit from the possibilities that AI brings. These have led, in turn, to the development of new possibilities to learn, to participate in culture, allowing many people who previously had no possibility to do this to get up to the same level as everyone else. So those are a couple of scenarios. We'll come back to scenarios in a minute, but this is one of the key themes of the Trend Report, which we were happy to launch working with Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago. Now, to summarise this all, two key messages. One, we don't know. The future is deeply uncertain. We don't know where AI is going to take us, we don't know where anything else is going to take us, and so we can't function on the basis of assuming that such a thing will happen or not. We just don't know. But at the same time, we shouldn't panic. There's a way to get around this. We can approach this future, even if we don't know what it is, with confidence. And that's really the goal of the Trend Report. That's why it's there as a tool, not just for librarians, but hopefully for anyone who has a stake, who has an interest in the future of knowledge and information. So, to dive a little bit more into the detail, we're talking a lot about AI today, and I think from what you've heard and what you'll continue to hear for the rest of the day and tomorrow, you'll hear lots of possibilities, lots of directions that AI could take us in. They're not all the same directions. There are positives, there are negatives, there are things where we don't know if they're positive or negative yet, we'll just find out later. It's complex, we don't know, we're not sure, it's a divergent trend. But crucially, AI doesn't exist on its own. Other trends will come into play. Political trends, social trends, environmental trends. We can't look at AI, we can't look at its impact on libraries, we can't look at the role that libraries can play around AI in a vacuum. We have to consider this interrelation, we have to consider these interactions. And so crucially, we shouldn't really be talking about predictions. And this is really one of the things when we talk about AI, it's so much about predictions. We need to accept that we're not talking about predictions. We're not necessarily even talking about probabilities. We're talking about possibilities, many different worlds, many different futures that may be waiting for us, and then we just need to think about how we deal with them. And I said that's really the purpose of the Trend Report. This is a document produced by a team already heavily focused on providing advice to government about what does the digital transition mean, what does the information and knowledge transition mean. It's a document that's not focused on trends in libraries, it's not focused on mega trends. There's lots of big accountancy firms that will write those and promote them. It's focused on the future of knowledge and information. It is, importantly, generative. It's not supposed to end conversations. It's not supposed to predict conversations. It's there to start them, to provide a structure, a framework for thinking about the future of AI, the future of societies, the future of how we conceive of information, where it's going. It aims to set out just a few ideas of some of the worlds that may be ahead of us. The scenarios I provided at the beginning, plenty of others as well going forward. Ideas about where we might be going. And it aims to provide tools about how we can prepare for those different futures. What skills, what approaches do we have in common? And what approaches do we have in common? How can we make sure that we are actually ready for a large variety? We'll come back in a second. How can we make sure that we are ready for this wide potential variety in futures? So, to run into the trends, the team at Queensland University of Technology reviewed about 500 texts, all looking at the potential future. They came up with 7 broad trends, about 29 sub-trends. These are really the building blocks of this report. Right? The first one is a really fundamental one. What is knowledge? What do we consider to be information? What do we consider to be something that we know? There are opportunities and negatives here. In each case, there's a positive and a negative. All of these trends can be divergent. So firstly, there's a growing recognition of things that we used to dismiss, things that we used to say weren't necessarily important, we see are important. We collect data that we never thought to consider as data in the past. At the same time, we also see this undermining of what is actually fact. This has been going on for some time, that's not likely to go away. What are my facts, what are your facts? Can you have 2 different facts existing in parallel? But, positively, we also reconsider how we think about how we share information. We potentially do things in shorter formats, different ways of actually imparting, sharing, teaching, learning. AI is obviously up there. Continue to transform society. Clearly, we've heard lots about the role of generative AI, the potential to speed up many tasks, the potential even to actually demonstrate, to shine a light on the prejudices that exist in the past. AI has been fantastically good at showing patterns, and in particular at showing patterns that show how the past record, the historical record, might not have been as fair, as objective, and as neutral as we might have hoped. But we also see interesting trends around, for example, digital twins, a digital version of you, even a digital version of an entire country at risk of climate change. What does this mean when yourself, all of the information about you, is held somewhere else? We see trends in trust. Coming back to that point about what do we count as a fact, what do we count as actual knowledge, as real information. Certainly, we see a falling level of trust in general government, but also in traditional media. People aren't using it so much, it tends to be underfunded, and so people are tending to look elsewhere. There is, at least in some areas, still strong respect for scientists, for science. There's still pretty good respect for libraries, but in this world where you can't necessarily turn up and say, trust me, I am authoritative, I am the gatekeeper, this raises some really important questions about how do you earn trust. I think we're definitely in a world where you can't demand trust of people anymore. That just doesn't work. You get very easily dismissed. Skills and abilities are becoming more complex. Another divergent trend. We know that there is a lack of provision of people with digital skills. If you get a programming degree, if you get a degree in data science, you've got a job for life right now. There's a huge demand for these sorts of talents, for these sorts of possibilities. But of course it means that those who don't have them risk falling behind. There's also a growing need to be data savvy, data literate in order to do the most basic parts of life, to access public services, to access communication, to be part of the community. On a more positive side, the fact that media and information literacy, it's 50 years old, but finally the world has caught up with libraries in understanding why this is something that actually matters, that being able to evaluate, to understand something, to ask, to question where it's come from, is actually something valuable. This is starting to get into curricula, it's starting to get into schools, and we can hope that we end up with a wider, more media and information literate society, better able to use the internet, better able to use it responsibly, effectively, competently. We see equity as an ongoing concern. And there's an irony that the internet was, of course, supposed to be an enabler. It was supposed to be a way of making sure that people who didn't have access to printing presses, who didn't have access to radio broadcasting equipment, could actually get their message out there. Through things like open access, it's a way of making sure that you didn't have to be signed up to a rich institution in order to be able to access information. Yet at the same time, we see that those who do have access to the internet, for them, it's a fantastic social ladder. It's a great way of doing social mobility. But for those who don't, the gap risks getting bigger. We do nonetheless see technology as providing an opportunity for more people to get online. There's massive progress being made in bringing people onto the internet, giving them some possibilities at least. Yet at the same time, we see this with recent UN text, there's also an acceptance that connectivity isn't enough. Without content, without skills, we're not getting what we actually need. We see environmental trends, growing pressures, and this has been mentioned a couple of times already, growing pressures on e-waste. They need to cut down, they need to make sure that things last, but also some quite hard questions about how much energy we can afford to use. At what point do we decide not to preserve information because simply it's not worth the electricity bills because the harm that's done to the planet is too high? What happens as well when climate disasters risk taking away entire cultures, as is the case in Tuvalu at the moment? And finally, this is always a favourite one with the field, there is a sense, a sort of backlash against a purely digital world, a sense that we shouldn't be purely focusing on online or remote connections, but actually a desire for people to put down their phones, to actually spend time with other human beings, to think about what is possible to create together. Not just focusing, even if you're using the internet, not just focusing on individual connectivity, but on collective connectivity. Activities like digital community archiving, work between different generations, and also the fact that with a lot of people still able to work remotely, able to work at distance, what does that mean for the shape, the geography of communities? What does that mean for the role of the public library? As a public open space, we don't have to buy a coffee every hour in order to be able to justify using the Wi-Fi. So, in addition to those, we have those scenarios, which I'll come on to actually in a minute. So, next key thing to recommend is, this is not a document to be read. This is here as a tool. As said at the beginning, this is a generative document. It's not, it cannot be, if it predicts the future, it's not done its job really. It comes from a perspective, and the authors will be very clear about this, from the perspective of two people working in a rich country, far away from here, but probably with a lot more in common with here than with many of the countries in its neighbourhood. It sets out some ideas, but again, 500 sources is such a tiny proportion of what's out there. Crucially, it should be a starting point. And so one thing that you'll find in that trend report that I think hopefully should be really helpful, not just when we're thinking about the future of AI and public collections, but also about the future of libraries, the future role of libraries, the future role of any institution, any actor that has an interest in providing access to information and knowledge in the future. It should provide that tool for thinking this through, thinking about how we make sure that not only do we continue to survive into the future, not only do we continue to thrive, but we can have a hope of trying to influence it, making sure that some of the values of the importance of universal access to information, the importance of knowledge as something that empowers people, something that allows for innovation, something that allows for the fulfillment of rights, to make sure that that's actually the case. So within the report, I encourage you to take a look. There's already a set of ways to play, things you can do based off the trend report. To actually reflect, sit back and think, what are the overall trends, the economic, social, cultural, technological, environmental trends that are shaping AI, that are shaping our services, that are shaping our societies? What would you add to the 7 that are down there that's not definitive in any way? I think there's a really interesting piece of work to be done about the intersection of trends. What happens when AI trends cross with environmental trends? Do we have to call stop on AI? What happens when the cost of electricity rises so quickly that it's not possible to train AI anymore? What happens when there's a risk of flooding, when there's a risk of damage to these centres, these providers that are providing AI at the moment? How, for example, do we combine issues around trust and equity? What happens when when the rise of AI runs into this understanding that actually knowledge, information is something far more diverse, far richer than we might have thought originally? What happens when these things collide? And actually systemically looking, writing down the consequences, looking at the divergences, it's a really helpful exercise for thinking through this future. The trend report includes 11 scenarios. We'll be sharing some more later. But also, think to yourselves, in what ways, when you look at this interaction, when you look at these trends, what might you expect in 5 to 10 years? What could this place, what could this library look like in 5 to 10 years? And accepting, crucially, that there are different scenarios out there. How do we prepare for some very different worlds? The 2 scenarios I gave at the beginning. What investments do we need to make in skills, in our buildings, in our collections, in order to be able to survive in both cases, given that we don't know what's actually going to happen? There's certainly more to come on this. Coming back to not panicking. As I said, the trend report is there, and you've got 7 trends. And so I think, firstly, we want to encourage, and again, one of the points of the trend report is to encourage, to support this thinking about sustainability. And there's many different ways of talking about sustainability. One that I know that we use and that I like quite a lot is that when you're having your planning sessions, when you're doing your strategy, you should leave a space at the table for the future. You should make sure that whoever's in that future, whoever's running your library in 10 years' time, is there, has a voice. You can use the scenarios for that, and then to look back and think, well, does that decision make sense from the perspective of the future? So it's always a good way of thinking about sustainability. I think Jessica's already mentioned the great work that Vida has done about thinking about what are the skills that we need. And clearly, there's lots of skills around AI literacy, there's more fundamental information and media literacy skills. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to think about what really makes libraries and museums unique, what really gives us a specific role, what really gives us a superpower when working with communities, that makes us trusted, that makes us a safe place for people, a place where people can come and be creative, where they can come and be together. What are those things, and how do we maximise that? How do we develop the skills to actually do that? I would always say that partnerships, again, can be really important. We absolutely can't do everything alone, but we don't need to. Libraries, museums have an incredible set of unique strengths that we can bring when working with AI providers, when working with others engaging around AI, when working with governments in this space. We don't need to do everything alone. There's a lot there, but there's so much that we can bring. There's so many things that others would be so jealous about. Our spaces, our people, our ethos, our ethics, these really matter. And crucially, be leaders. And when we use the term leader, that's not attached to a certain job position or a certain place in the hierarchy. Certainly the way that we promote the idea of leadership in the context of the trend report is the fact of being an actor, being someone who's willing to go out and try and change things. Not being just a taker, not just accept, not just deny AI, not just deny any of these trends, but rather thinking, well, what can I do about it in the space that I have? To be imaginative in doing so. And this is something that we think can be done at every level. and that if you have this look to the future, if you have this consideration of what's coming, then hopefully we can actually try and shape it to be actors, to be agents. Finally, just to close with a couple of thanks. As I said, the report itself is produced, obviously we were heavily involved in it, but the key author team comes from Queensland University of Technology, to Professor Michael Deswani and to Dr. Kim Osman. We're grateful to all those who were on our Trend Report Advisory Committee for making this happen, and our expert author contributions. We have a great range of scenarios from external experts, including people from outside the library field, which I think is always useful, not just because it's great to get people outside the library field to think about libraries, but also they may have a perspective that we don't. And of course to mention Sitting for the Global Library that funded this work. So with that, thank you.